All right, you want to start this thing?
Let's go.
All right, here we go as usual. Hey, what's up, America? Welcome to Goodnight America. I'm America's sweetheart, Eric Ryan, and with me to discuss the news is Alex Fink. Here's what we're doing today. Normally on the show, what we do is we interview the very best and brightest nonfiction authors of controversial subjects that the world has to offer. But then sometimes we talk about the news, and we're going to talk about the news today in a slightly different way. Well, not really, but I'm going to put this gloss over it, which is that we're trying to get on Jewish Life television. But what I'm going to do is represent the Gentile side. I am going to represent every non-Jewish person on the planet in my arguments. And Alex, you're going to represent the Jewish side of the Jewish side of representing all Jews on the argument on each side of the news here today. That's exciting, isn't it?
Now, you should know that on average, 2 Jews have 3 opinions. So you're asking one Jew to represent one opinion that applies to everybody? That's unlikely to work, but I'll do my best.
Okay, I think most Gentiles, certainly Americans, are wildly uninformed. So I think I'm just one notch above that. So we'll see how this works out. I think it's going to be good.
All right,
Goodish.
let's try it out.
Okay, here we go. So again, I should point out what we try to do when we discuss the news is not be as Trumpy as every other news program, because that just gets repetitive and ridiculous. Now, I couldn't avoid him entirely today, but I try to stay away from the White House, only because there's more news in the world going on than the White House. All right, so here we go. First story. This comes from Science Daily. This first of all, I just want to preface this by saying I love when smart people do super smart things. And that's what this looks like. I speak the language, I speak English, but when I'm reading this, I have no fucking idea what they're talking about. It sounds very smart, and I'm just full of wonder and awe at such things. I'm sure you know, and we're going to get to it, what they're saying, but here's a high level breakdown. The article says, all right, so this is the title. Breakthrough in fuel cell recycling turns forever chemicals into renewable resources. That sounds great. It says a recent breakthrough from the University of Leicester introduces an innovative method for recycling fuel cells, utilizing high-frequency sound waves to separate valuable materials from forever chemicals, or PFASs, in seconds. The process is both scalable and sustainable, addressing environmental concerns associated with PFASs and reducing reliance on expensive raw materials. If you don't know what a forever chemical is, or a PFAS, I can't exactly explain what they are, but I know they don't go away. They leach into drinking water where they contaminate it. That is bad because it screws with your reproductive system, your immune system. It poses cancer risks, and it has endocrine system disruption shit going on. So this seems bad. These people have done some wild magic with sound waves, separated it through the recycling process, and now fuel cells can be used for altruism and good. And is that right at any level?
I mean, it is about right, but this is a good example of the difference between science and engineering. In science, this is a huge breakthrough. We found something that couldn't be solved before. We solved it. Amazing. We're happy. In engineering, you start one question earlier and you ask, okay, but what are fuel cells and why should we even care if now they're slightly better than they used to be? Mm-hmm. And the answer is we probably shouldn't. Nobody's going to use them anyway.
Oh.
Right? So fuel cells are basically one of the alternatives to using electric energy. Like you can have an electric car, you can have a fuel cell based car that is typically powered by hydrogen. Nobody uses that, except it was an idea by Japanese manufacturers to try to build an alternative clean energy car without using Chinese components, right? So the only reason they went to fuel cells is they thought, well, if we use batteries, then we need all those different minerals that only China has. We don't want to be dependent on China. Let's bet the house on fuel cell technology. And that bet kind of failed. And nobody drives a car that's powered by these things. So it's a nice discovery. Maybe one day it will come in handy. Today, it doesn't affect the roadmap of anyone developing anything in the world.
Oh, that's very disappointing then. Very disappointing. So this article is essentially useless. Nobody gives a shit.
Well, I mean, again, this is what basic science looks like. It's people discover random shit, right? Or they learn how to do random shit. And for 20 years, you have absolutely no use case for it, and everybody forgets about it. And then one day, there's another discovery in another field that suddenly makes this thing relevant. And now everybody uses it, right? So a lot of the things that we have discovered over the years had absolutely no use until they were used off-book for some completely different process. So it could be that this discovery by itself would become relevant if fuel cells become better in some other way, right? Or it could become relevant to something completely different than fuel cells, right? If we know how to remove PFAS from the environment, maybe we can fix the stuff that is caused by Teflon, right? Because PFAS kind of, or various versions of it exist in coatings, exist in a lot of other things that we use, including on every skillet that we have in our homes. So I don't know, it might be relevant at some point. Right now, it's not going to change anything in the next few years.
Interesting. So I was going to juxtapose this against the idea that this current administration, again, I don't want to fucking talk about them, but sometimes you have to. They've done things like it was either proposed or enacted the following cuts: 40% on the NIH, 50% on the National Science Foundation, 39% of the CDC's budget. They've also made cuts when it comes to science, climate science programs and clean energy programs. Now, if I'm sort of smushing arguments together here, but are you saying that maybe these cuts are somewhat justified because they're doing a lot of the stuff that's not needed? Or do you think these cuts are still stupid because we still need to be spending money on areas when it comes to things like health and science?
I actually don't know the answer to that because it all depends on the specifics.
Okay,
In
good.
general, I'm sure that all of these things are so bloated that if you cut them correctly, it's not that hard to find 30 or 40% you can cut without losing anything useful. Now, have they been cut correctly? Given my knowledge of how things are typically done by the current administration, probably not.
Right.
So that's where the real question lies. Now,
Yeah.
in general, if you talk about funding science, right, science that is applicable, like let's say some advancement in batteries today, can typically be funded by industry because they can immediately productize it and make a lot of money, right? So it makes sense for Tesla to invest in improvements in battery technology, right? Now, basic science that cannot be productized immediately, is typically funded by some other way because a company that would productize stuff in the next few years isn't going to fund that. It's just too far away for them, right? So at some point, government started stepping in and they started funding it through universities, through grants, through direct employment in government entities, through semi-governmental entities like Bell Labs used to be in the US, etc. It was an independent company, but pretty much government people showed up every day to control what it does. So you have these different mechanisms that governments do. And yes, when you cut them, it is sometimes painful, but sometimes all you're doing is displacing things, right? Yeah. So the same researcher is now going to go to a different place, will keep working on exactly what he or she was working on using a different source of funding.
I just think at a macro level that our only hope as a species is that a small group of super smart people save the rest of our us morons from ourselves. So if we're gonna overspend, I would say these are areas, let's throw a bunch of money at it. Plus, to your point about whether or not they're doing it right, a lot of the reasons for these cuts were that these institutions were spreading dangerous ideologies. I don't think that's a good enough reason. I think you kind of have to look at the books, don't you?
Yeah, I think the ideology is definitely not the right approach. Right. But I do think that these institutions have, in some cases, discredited themselves. Right. I think you and I discussed an example of the head of the NIH, Anthony Fauci, right, how he came to the idea of recommending double masking to everybody, or basically working with the CDC. And then it became an official CDC recommendation. That idea came from a TikTok meme. Right? People started talking about it on TikTok. Then Fauci was asked about it during an NBC interview by the interviewer. And since his general stance was better safe than sorry, he, of course, confirmed, yeah, I guess it's a good idea. And then the next day, it became an official CDC recommendation. I don't think after seeing this, my level of respect for the NIH goes up.
Right.
Right. I also don't think my level of respect for the NIH goes up after I realized to what extent the NIH was involved in the research that likely led to the existence of the virus to begin with. Right. Because the research was conducted in North Carolina until 2015. Then the same person, the same researcher, and the same group of people basically moved from North Carolina to create this new Institute of Virology in Wuhan, China. Then for 2 years or however many years, we were told that the Wuhan virus has nothing to do with the Wuhan Virology Lab. But it turned out, obviously, it does, right? It's still not a confirmed thing. It's still a hypothesis, but we all know it. And in fact, we all knew it from March 2020, right? It was really evident. It was evident what it is. There is a paper in Nature from 2015 outlining exactly how that virus was created by the exact same person who was the co-head of that virology lab in Wuhan, China. So once you find that out about the NIH, and then I hear somebody's cutting the funding in the NIH, my first instinct is good for them.
Yeah, it does hurt credibility, but I mean, that would have to be, you'd have to take that and then throw it against everything they've done good. It's more, you have to really think hard about these things. You can't just go dangerous ideology. Here's half your budget,
Well, look, there's two ways to do cuts. And here again, I'm going very abstract, right? Yeah. But you could really go down into the weeds and figure out what works, what doesn't, what contributes what, and then start cutting. Or you have the Parkinson approach, right? Parkinson's law is that basically every task will always consume all the resources available to it. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the best way to cut, according to this former minister in the UK government, is to basically say, why don't we tell everybody to cut 10%? And chances are, if you're a bureaucracy, you have 10% to cut without losing anything. In fact, you might actually become better. Right now, 40%, I don't know if that works with Parkinson's law. You probably have to understand the specifics there.
I just wonder when I'm going to get my 40. So there's 40% less NIH, 50% less National Science Foundation, 39% less CDC. When are we getting those checks? When are we getting the kickbacks? Right? Isn't that supposed to be?
Well, you're not getting those checks. Whoever owns government bonds is getting those checks.
Disappointing. I thought as a taxpayer, as a U.S. taxpayer, I thought
there is some discussion because we all know the current president likes to send people checks with his signature on them.
Yeah.
So maybe you will get something, but it will actually be a bad decision if you do. Now, I do want to talk about government-funded research in another context you mentioned, which is global warming. And one thing that always bugged me about the global warming discussion is that we have these programs for mitigating the effects of CO2, or basically slowing down the rate at which we emit CO2. And those cost trillions of dollars if you actually take into account all the costs, right? And then you have the potential of developing a technology that would sequester carbon from the atmosphere, which seems to be like an entirely solvable problem if you just invest $100 million into a bunch of startups and let them work. So it's kind of astounding to me that we're focused so much on just slowing down or conserving stuff, right? Yeah. Especially the non-conservative among us are focused on conserving the atmosphere as is and slowing down any changes, when it seems much more promising to say, okay, that direction should exist. We shouldn't completely eliminate it, but let's dump at least half of the resources that we're allocating to this problem into the possibility of developing a cure. Right, one thing that just fixes it once and for all, and then we can completely control and decide, hey, by next year we want to have 200 ppm. Boom, 200 ppm. By the next year we want 150 ppm. Boom, 150 ppm. It seems like a solvable problem, just binding to carbon that's floating in the air. We know how to do this stuff.
See, that's the crazy thing. I don't know the science, but I think I am pretty good at pattern recognition. And this is what I know about humans. We're awful at preventative maintenance. We are not going to change our behavior. So really, just like with this, you have to figure out a way to fix the shit we've already done. It seems to me that's with every issue. We're not going to change our behavior. We're not going to go to all of these alternative fuel sources, which are just as dirty in many cases. You just have to figure out how to fix the shit that we've done, which is why we need super smart people, which is I usually default to give them as much money as possible. So if it's startups, yes, throw the money at the startups. Just let smart people cook, I guess would be the thing that I'm in favor
Though
of.
I will agree and disagree with you on one thing, which is we are going to go to all these alternative fuel sources, and we're going to increase our usage of existing ones too. Right? So I don't believe in replacement. I don't think it ever happens. I think the only thing that was ever replaced in the energy field was whale blubber. Right? Everything else, we have always increased our consumption of. We burn more fuel today than we did when it was the main fuel source. We burn more coal. I think China just got 1 gigawatt of coal power plants online in the past year. Right? That's like more than California and New York combined. So I think we're always bringing in more of everything, and we're going to consume all the energy that is available, and we will keep growing our consumption of energy. So yes, we want most of the new energy to come from good sources and not bad sources. But if we want to really fix the problem, we need to look at which of the symptoms we don't like. And just like in medicine, try to see if we can just cure the symptom initially. And then we see what the side effects are and what else we need to cure.
We need the Ozempic for global warming. We just need a very simple solution, because we've known for years we could do all this stuff in terms of saving the environment and losing weight. We choose not to. We just need a nice little jab in the stomach once a month. You know, that's the way.
Well, hopefully. I think the jury is still out on Ozempic. Looks very promising.
Right. There are plenty of side effects. We'll deal with those later. You got to kick the can down the road. That's when we'll do it later.
But it is a correct approach, I think.
I think so too. I'm glad we both agree on that because, I don't have a lot of faith in us changing our behavior in any way. Oh, okay, this is good. So, this is from our friends over at Science Blog. This says that childhoods in tough neighborhoods reshape brain responses, studies reveal. So this is the first paragraph. It says a new study reveals that growing up in unsafe neighborhoods can literally rewire how children's brains respond to threats, and that this adaptation persists well into adulthood. The research, based on brain imaging of over 500 adolescents, finds that kids exposed to high neighborhood violence and instability showed heightened amygdala activity, which is the brain's fear center, and reduced connectivity to parts of the brains involved in emotional regulation and decision making. I think this is interesting because I think they don't mention this in the article at all, but when you think about fucked up kids, I think people tend to say it's the video games, it's the music. Certainly when we were children, I think with violent television and movies, it's the internet, it's TikTok, it's YouTube. It seems that all the science would point to toxic environments in the greater community. And also, this wasn't something they talked about, but divorce rates. If your parents are divorced, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to have serious emotional and behavioral problems. You're 45% more likely to have anxiety and depression. So my larger thing here is that, yes, environment really affects children, which is probably an obvious thing, but the numbers bear it out to the point of absurdity.
All right, let me play devil's advocate as I often do.
What?
All right, yes. First of all, I think people who grow up in a bad environment end up having lasting effects of that bad environment. Duh. I think we could have known that without any research, right? It's kind of obvious. Now, the question is, what is that lasting effect? And the second question is, how do you decouple it from, well, those people are products of that environment. Maybe there was something that selected them to be in that environment to begin with, genetically, right? As an example, right? But let's talk about the first one first. We know that growing up in a difficult environment, yes, it creates some negative effects, potentially things that look a lot like PTSD, right? Mm-hmm. But it also creates a lot more resilient. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So I think that there is a reason why children of immigrant families who were poor growing up in a new country end up generally succeeding much more than the local population. Why? They grew up with some scarcity. They grew up with some difficulty that they had to overcome. They were otherized because maybe they had an accent or they had a different skin color or other recognizable traits that made them an outsider, right? And all of these things actually increase success, or at least they increase incredible success, right? Maybe on average, these people will not succeed more, but the best among them will succeed much more than the best among the local population typically. So it's kind of hard to know, right? Obviously, do we want to eliminate poverty and crime? Yes, right? Yeah. But if you see somebody not successful, should you just blame the fact that they grew up with poverty and crime? No, there needs to be some personal agency here. Now, let me talk about the nature versus nurture angle here, which is that very often you look at, let's say, children of a parent that had so-and-so problem, and those children are much more likely to have so-and-so problem, right? Is it because they grew up in a bad environment that they developed this? Mm-hmm. Or is it their parents had the gene, they had the gene, they happen to develop the same behavioral pattern as their parents? So divorce, I think, is probably more on the nurture side because it's more likely, I think, that children who grew up in a family that wasn't okay just don't have a good example of what does an okay family look like. They don't have anything to emulate, right? So they end up with bad behavioral patterns just because they don't have a good one to copy. They're copying the bad one. But there might be a genetic element there, right? Maybe both parents were really intemperate, and so the child is really intemperate. Being intemperate is not great for relationships. Ew. So they end up with an increased chance of divorce too. So I don't know that, right? I don't know if you can apply that to specific neighborhoods, but you could have had some selection as well. If it's a really bad neighborhood, if it's been a really bad neighborhood for a long time, presumably anybody who was talented has left that neighborhood before, right? And so right now you have had inverse selection for who is left in that really bad place.
Right.
And yes, right now, if you just start examining people who have grown up in that place, what you're measuring is a population of the descendants of those who didn't leave.
Yeah.
Right? And that is a very self-selective group. And that is not only true not only true of neighborhoods, it's also true of specific countries or specific regions. Like I was born in Transnistria, that separatist regime within Moldova, right? That basically declared independence in 1991. Everybody said, independence, what are you talking about? No, you're a part of Moldova. And so nobody traded with it. There was no business. There was nothing, right? There was no economy. They still used Soviet passports for the next 10 years, and they still used their own invented currency. If you meet now a person who chose not to leave Transnistria over the past 30 years, you know something about that person, even without talking to them, right? There's a certain lack of ambition that you expect now in somebody who was in that environment with the ability to leave it and didn't leave. So I don't know. You have to decouple these confounding factors before you can really reach a conclusion.
Oh, yeah.
The only conclusion I can give you is, duh.
Which is good enough, I think. We don't need science. It's pretty fucking obvious. So there's a lot to what you just said. I think as far as like the staying thing, I read this book, White Rural Rage. I had the guy in the show. He makes a good point about the middle of the country having some sort of like, and they'd find this very insulting, but like a brain drain. Because if you're in the middle, you're the smartest person in some rural community, they're not going to say stick around and start a startup. They're going to say go to the big city and go get an education. So there's that factor. I think to your point earlier, boiling water softens a potato but hardens an egg. So environmental factors don't hit everybody the exact same way. Right. And to your point about immigrant communities, I forget which Gladwell book he talked, I think it might have been Outliers, but he specifically went to Jews and Chinese immigrants. And his point was largely, all right, not only did they have a difficult upbringing, but their work ethic. So if you put anybody, the Jews in the textile industries were waking up at 4 a.m, working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. That work ethic is going to make you rise above the general population, especially when put against the children of, say, super rich people who have zero work ethic. So there's a lot of mitigating factors. And to your point about what's normal in a relationship, what you grow up with and what you see is normal. So I'm from originally, I didn't grow up there. I'm a military brat, but I grew up, my parents are from this city called Lynn. My parents were in town for a wedding. So we had a brunch in Lynn over the weekend. We parked, I would say, half a football field away from the restaurant we were going to, but it was in downtown Lynn. Walking back, my 4-year-old and 8-year-old saw their first homeless drug addicts. And it was like, that is shocking to us because we live in a semi-rural, semi-affluent area of the state. And this was the first time, and it freaked me out. You automatically go closer to your wife, closer to your kids. You don't think they're going to attack you or anything. And they were emaciated as fuck. So I'm pretty sure I could have taken them. But that is, if you live in Lynn, that's your fucking normal. If you're a kid in Lynn, that's your normal. And if that seeps into the normal part of your brain, that's fucking dangerous, Yeah. So
first of all, I love your thought process. See an emaciated homeless guy. First thought, I can take that guy.
Oh yeah, I hope he doesn't bite me because I'm gonna get a fucking zombie virus. But yeah.
But all right, since we have a semi-Jewish theme here, then let me comment on the Jewish thing, because I often think about it when people start talking about privileged groups versus unprivileged groups, etc. I'm certainly not from a privileged group, right? I certainly grew up knowing that there's discrimination against Jews where I live, knowing that my father didn't get into the university of his choice because of what his nose looked like, right? And the message I kept getting from my parents, from basically the moment I could understand what they were saying, was you can't be like everybody in your class. You have to be the best in class to get what they will get, right? That was driven into me, that the expectation is nothing short of excellence, like anything short. And now suddenly that discrimination is going to get you. Therefore, you have to be better. If you come back with a 99, we were graded on a 100-point system, right? The question my dad would always ask me is, why not 120? Like, why couldn't you do it right and ask for a bonus question? Right? That was the minimum expectation. And I think that is how Ashkenazi Jews tend to achieve excellence. Now, the Chinese, they have a different method, right? There's the tiger mom method. It's usually a lot more direct. Jews use guilt, shame, generally, expectations. Chinese use threats of direct violence. But generally, both of these methods tend to produce a good response to adverse environments. Now, there are groups that don't have that in their culture. So I don't know to what extent that is work ethic and to what extent that is just parents having a strategy of how to transfer a working strategy to the next generation.
Yeah. It's also, I think, and maybe this is a dumb analogy, but the big contract with athletes, they grind and grind and grind, especially in baseball. You hand them this money that's guaranteed and they tend to relax a little bit. I think for a lot of immigrants, specifically to the United States, where there is no healthy social safety net, you have to fucking bust your ass. There's a lot of opportunity, but there's also a lot of pitfalls along the way. So I don't know. Yeah. It's multifactorial. And there's a lot of greats have come from really shitty backgrounds. So I wouldn't necessarily create a manufactured shitty background for your children. And so the opposite of this is not to say that everyone that comes from a great home and a great neighborhood is going to come out great. You know, it's just, it's too much.
No, I mean, obviously you're talking about statistics here. And like you said, different people respond to different things in a different way. And people have some sort of innate tendency, right? So when you apply the same strategy to 10 different kids, it won't work well on all of them. Some of them will be better by it. Some of them will be worse. But this is, I guess, an interesting question that you bring up. If scarcity is necessary for a work ethic, for having a real drive and ambition, then if you are well off as a parent, how do you create the scarcity in your children? That's a question me and pretty much all the friends that I have worry about a lot, right? Because we all know that our children have less scarcity than we used to. So are they going to have the same drive? Right. And I don't know. I think you do have to manufacture it sometimes. Like you still have to use the phrase, we can't afford it, even though you know you're lying. Of course you can afford it, right? Yeah. But I do that with my kids because I remember when I was 5 years old, I asked my parents for a bicycle. They made me sit down and calculate how much money father makes, how much money mother makes, what our expenses are, and what is the price of a bicycle. And I concluded myself, we cannot afford a bicycle now, right? Yeah. I cannot do this exercise with my kids because if they see how much I make, I lost the argument. So I have to manufacture a process that leads to the same conclusion and to the same mindset without using the same methods that I've seen, because my salary is not in the Soviet Union like my parents' salaries were.
Yeah. The most extreme example of this I saw Giselle, Tom Brady's former wife, on some documentary when they were still married. And she was saying, you know, I don't buy my kids iPhones. I don't do this. I'm like, oh my God, she's worth more than Brady. I think she's worth something like 600 million. He's worth, you know, at this point, that I'm sure $500 million. So that to manufacture that would come across as so goddamn disingenuous. And I wonder if the kids are like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? So it's, I don't know. It's very difficult. You know?
Well, I mean, there's also a long-term versus short-term question here, right? Maybe the kids will resent it in the beginning, but then at some point they'll get it.
Yeah,
right?
They're living in a mansion.
They will just grow up resentful. You don't know, right? But it seems like parents who are overly nice to their kids don't end up having kids that respect them. I think that's what you see with the baby boomer generation in general, right? And so being nice to your kids is not really the best strategy either. It probably makes sense to be a little bit of a hard ass. Like they will not like you while it's going on, right? But they will be thankful later on. Of course, you need some balance.
You do. I think my parents largely, they were, my father was more of a disciplinarian than I am, but we used the same general tactic, which is I give him enough rope. My daughter's 4. She's uncontrollable, but my son is 8 and enough rope to hang yourself. So we're cool until you fuck up. And I know you're fucking up. And then the hammer comes down quickly. So
you have to be careful with hang yourself not becoming a literal thing, because kids can harm themselves, right? So you need to give them enough freedom, but stop them one foot short, or only enough freedom when the consequences aren't grave. But I don't know. I know that I don't have the capacity to be a good cop most of the time. So in any sort of negotiation, even with kids, like, do you want me to be bad cop or worse cop? I don't have the good cop feature in me.
No?
Right. So that's my wife's job.
That's our dynamic too, I think. All right, here we go. All right, again from Science Daily. This subject gets me all riled up. Social drinking, also a well-worn path to alcohol use disorder. Just say alcoholism, you dork. Okay, this is the first paragraph. When picturing a typical alcoholic, people tend to imagine a person drinking at home alone, but that focus overlooks the social origins of many serious alcohol problems. So it goes on, blah, 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 goes on to say, well, solitary drinking might serve as a useful early indicator of alcohol use disorder risk. Research suggests that individuals reliably consume more alcohol in social contexts than when alone. Fucking obviously. What is talking about? Only a dork who's never I'll let you go, but this is one more quote. It says, people tend to assume that the mere presence of other individuals exerts a beneficial effect that tempers the desire to overindulge when drinking, suggesting that when you're drinking with a bunch of people, you're like, oh, I'm having enough fun. No more shots for me. What the fuck is this thing talking about?
Yeah, so I think, well, first of all, what you're looking at there is not some sort of a scientific paper or research study. It's an opinion piece, I guess, by somebody in the soft sciences who tend to have opinions all over the place to begin with. But yes, my first reaction is just like in the first article we discussed today, duh. But the other one is, yes, it gets a lot of things under the hood completely wrong. I think the correct way that I would structure it is the complete inverse. Start from the other direction. If you see somebody drinking alone, it is a sufficient indicator to suggest that they can't control it, right? Because otherwise, why would they drink alone? Right. But if you see somebody drinking socially, you don't know. It could be that they also can't control it, or it could be that they can control it, but they made the tactical decision to get drunk today because it makes for a better relationship. Right. So seeing somebody drink in a company, you just don't know if they're an alcoholic or not.
Yeah.
Drinking alone is just a better indicator, but it doesn't mean that people are more likely to be alcoholics if they drink alone. Like, you don't know. Like, to determine whether somebody is an alcoholic, you need to actually measure how much they drink.
Yeah, no shit. And humans are awful test subjects. No one's going to sign up to go, oh, it's happy hour. Can you plug me to some machine so you can tell how much I'm fucking drinking today? Some of these quotes too. I mean, to your point, we've sort of shit on this, so we know it's stupid. But Jesus, some of the most serious negative consequences from alcohol use are linked specifically with social consumption. In particular, alcohol-related violence, risky sex, and extreme binge drinking are all primarily or exclusively social drinking phenomenon. Well, that sounds like a lot of fucking fun. I got to tell you, doesn't it?
I mean, it is true that if you look at the things that are downstream of consuming alcohol, it seems like basically the best thing you can do for society is to ban alcohol. The problem is we've tried it in the 1920s, and it doesn't work really well, right? And we're not even the only ones that tried it. Basically, almost every country in the world has tried it in one shape or another, right? All I can say about drinking culture in the US is it's actually kind of weird because of its extremes. Right? If you go to Europe, like, they would have a glass of wine with lunch. Nobody would think, oh my God, this is alcoholism. I just made a grave sin. Right? You look at it as just a part of life. You don't do too much of it. You don't do too little of it. You just enjoy it when it's appropriate. Whereas in the US, one drink during the day and you're an alcoholic, but then people go to college and having not consumed anything until age 21,
they go nuts.
They just completely lose it and go nuts. Moreover, when I look at how they go nuts drinking beer. How do you even get drunk from that? I don't get it.
Yeah, well, if you have to drink 800 of them, and that's the fucking problem. But
but then you're just peeing all the time. When do you have time to drink?
My shitty beer days are over. I'm either doing a nice high ABV IPA, or I'm doing bourbon because I like high octane shit. But it says alcohol may quell anxiety and lower inhibition. Good things. Potentially enhancing social experiences. Another good thing. These qualities reinforce its role as a tool for fostering feelings of social connectedness. I only say that to say that I talk about the male loneliness epidemic all the fucking time. So the thing that men do in general when they hang out and they are not lonely is drink. And if it's not, I guess you could go out with your male friends and like hike. But I don't know who does that. And they're going to say golf. Golf is, everyone's like, when I say I don't like golf, you know what they say to me? You get to walk around and drink. So drinking is just such an integral part to the male bonding experience. And I think that it should be. And again, so loneliness, we know, they say that it can increase the risk of premature death by 29%. That's the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Face-to-face socializing, on the other hand, reduces stress. It makes you feel better. It facilitates bonding. It provides a ritual of connection. It helps people unplug. It gives people structure. So to me, this demonization of alcoholism, or not alcoholism, but just alcohol consumption, means that you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of positive. It's not just, okay, it fucks with your liver and it takes 10 years off your life. Yeah, maybe. But also you have friends and you're having a good time while you're alive.
Yeah, I think like many things, you just have to have good drinking culture, right? Basically, there is a good way to drink and there are bad ways to drink.
Yeah.
And if you start showing, even to growing kids early, what does a good culture look like you don't overindulge, you only drink until you're at this condition and you don't let it go to that condition, right?
Yes.
And you have to do certain things between drinks. You don't just sit there and hammer one after the other, right? It puts all of it in a framework in which it is positive and it actually helps with bonding.
Yeah.
If you don't have that and you just say it's bad, never touch it, never touch it. By the time you're not there and they start touching it, oh my God, they will do weird things with it.
Oh, absolutely. You're gonna yes, it is such an I often think about our drinking culture as opposed to the rest of the world, and the whole idea of like not drinking and it being this awful thing. In my experience, doesn't exist anywhere else. I think it all boils down to our Puritan founding. We're still hung up on some really weird things with sex and substances.
I think you got the timing wrong on that one. I'm going to challenge you. I think throughout the 19th century, the United States was by far the country that consumed the most alcohol in the world.
Let's
It
go.
was
We've really
completely
fallen off.
fine with it, right?
Yeah.
Like the vast majority of presidents had bourbon for breakfast.
Oh yeah, no, like
It's completely normal, right? And basically all of it was, in fact, probably over the top until 1920 and Prohibition.
Yeah.
Right. So all of the effects you're seeing now, they're not effects of Puritanism. They're effect of Prohibition and its cancellation, probably.
I
But
just
that's
wonder,
me.
not the actual consumption, just the ideology about how it's bad. So my parents live on Mount Vernon property, and you can go read George Washington's journals. And in it, he has his sort of like his liquor, like his shit he has to buy for a party. And that those guys fucking drank. It was like 16 barrels of cider, 20 barrels of beer, bourbon out the asshole. So yes, they definitely drank a lot.
If you want the most fun journal to read in this regard, if you look at basically the modern invention of the diet, it originates with this guy named William Banting in the 19th century in England, right? Which is why Banting is also used as a verb for dieting in some countries. If you look at what his diet looks like, it was basically low carb with copious amounts of alcohol. The amount that guy drank while losing weight, and he lost a lot of weight, was pretty impressive. I think if I drank that much, even without eating anything,
Yeah, he lost
I
the
would
weight
blow
because of the
up.
liver disease. But whatever,
Yeah,
listen, weight loss is weight loss.
Yeah, he was working as an undertaker, so I think he walked a lot. Maybe that's the one thing he did that I don't.
Carrying caskets and shit, it's gonna be heavy. One more statistic that goes to prove that I'm right. It says that only 5.3% of U.S. adults develops alcoholism, which again, that might be low because humans are very difficult test subjects, and no one would probably admit it. I'm not sure that there's a definitive blood test that everyone's taking, but even quadruple that, I still think it's too demonized. You know?
All right, let me add the Jewish angle here because we must have
Jewish
one,
angle.
right?
Yes.
Wine makes a human heart happy. That's a direct quote from the Old Testament. I stand by it, right? Granted, bourbon, they just didn't have it then. Maybe they would have had a different opinion on it. But yeah, for certain holidays, Passover, you have to drink 4 glasses. Purim, you have to drink until you can't recognize your friends. Right? Don't do that very often, but once a year, that's still fine. Right? So I think it is a part of the culture if it's a healthy culture. If it becomes a barf on the sidewalk at least once a week, as it is in many places in Britain, let's say, probably an unhealthy culture.
That's
and
too
you want
much.
to grow out
That's
of it.
too much. And I will say this: I'm an agnostic, but I am a recovering Catholic. Jesus's blood is wine, from what I understand. I had to drink enough of it, So if his blood is wine, it's got to be a little bit okay.
Yeah, so if you drink it every time, you're practically from the Maasai tribe, right?
See, we're all the same. When you boil it down, we're all the fucking same, don't you think? Okay, well, we better start drinking because according to the planet, World War III is imminent. Isn't that exciting? All right. So this comes from our friends at Global News. It says World War III is imminent. Many Americans and Europeans fear, according to a poll. Now, this YouGov polling conducted in Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, and the U.S. shows that between 41 and 55% of respondents in each country think that another world war is likely to occur in the next 5 to 10 years. 45% of Americans share the same view. If another world war were to happen, the majority believe that the conflict would involve nuclear weapons, which I think is reasonable. They were there the last time. And 57 to 73% think that a third world war would result in higher casualty numbers than previous conflicts. What do you think's going to happen?
Well, I don't think we have enough to predict here. I think that it's likely to say that the chances are non-trivial, right? So yes, there is a good chance that something will ignite a world war. There is a very high chance that if it is a world war, then nuclear weapons are suddenly being used.
Yes.
Now, what the effect of that will be and what the extent of that will be, like if there are these magic maps that FEMA publishes every year that show what happens if Russia fires 500 missiles at us, what happens if they fire 2,000, right? Are they going to just blow their load like that? I don't know. That is a Cold War kind of thinking. Maybe people can just try a little bit and see what happens instead of just blowing their load right away. Same might be true of India and Pakistan, probably the more likely place that the spark might fly soon. So I don't know how it's going to go. I do think that at some point I started diving into the subject and I decided to really look at this idea of a nuclear winter because I couldn't really understand, like, on what basis are people predicting it? If I see, let's say, the worst case map, 2,000 Russian missiles hit the US, I was looking at it and it looks like, well, at least on the map, if you do all the circles of radiation, there's a lot of places that don't get affected at all. So obviously a lot of places will get hurt. They will be unlivable for a while. So why wouldn't people just move into those places that aren't affected? And basically the theory as to why that won't work is that beyond the damage caused by the bombs themselves and beyond the radiation that stays there for a while after the bombs hit, there will be a change in the world's climate, basically because of all the stuff that is flying into the atmosphere, right? That would block sunlight and make the Earth much colder. First of all, it seems like a good solution to global warming. Sorry to put that out there. But second of all, the one time we actually had a local test of this effect, it failed and produced the exact opposite result, right? There was a case where basically a whole bunch of oil wells in Saudi Arabia were blown up and caught fire. And the amount of ashes that flew into the atmosphere was supposed to create a cooling effect locally, and it absolutely didn't because there was a fucking fire on the ground. So I don't think that this cooling thing actually happens. It is a model. We haven't done very well with model, and here it is a model that wasn't tested for 30 years and then was tested once locally and produced the opposite result of what you expected.
You just never know, huh? You just never know.
Should we just keep assuming that if a bunch of nuclear bombs go off, the Earth is going to cool? I don't think that assumption has any merit. And in general, we've been warming for a while. If we cool a little bit, it might cancel out.
Yeah, we need a nice nuclear war, I think. So the thing
or a volcano eruption, which when we had the Icelandic one, right? Yeah. After that, the Earth cooled by basically 1 degree for like a year and a half. Seemed to have good effect overall, right?
So you get all these scientists together. They go, listen, let's set off a volcano, cool the thing down, bada bing, bada boom. Then I don't have to change my lifestyle. No more LED bulbs. I hate these things. So my concern, and to your point, was always that the nukes, because I looked up the number, according to the internet, at least there's 12,331 nuclear missiles on the planet. I've always heard it takes 100 for nuclear winter, which, you know, why bother with 12,000 when only 100 is going to wipe us all out? But if you're saying that that's not a fear anymore, then fuck it, bring on war.
Well, I don't know if it's not a fear anymore. It just seems like it's a hypothesis that nobody has tested except once, and then it failed, right? Could still be right. Yeah. I'm not sure we want to test it, right? We would rather this hypothesis goes untested forever, right? But my point is, if I had to put a percentage on it, like how likely is it that 100 nukes going off is going to result in all of us starving over the next 3 years? I would say it's less than 10%. I don't get it. Why people just assume it to be true without ever testing it.
Yeah, I don't know. We do a lot of that. I do like this, though, in this article. It says, ranging from a low of 16% in Italy to a high of 44%, this is in Europe. These are the countries, the percentage that believe that their countries could hold up, that the militaries could hold up. That, in contrast to Americans who think 71% of us think that we can win a war. And we better consider that we have an $820 billion defense budget. Can you imagine spending this much money, going without healthcare, going without affordable higher education? If we don't fucking win, what are we doing here? What have we done? This is the last vestige of American exceptionalism.
Right. But also in the defense of the American armed forces, unlike those other countries, we keep testing ours. Right. And so we don't just spend a lot of money on it. You could spend a lot of money and think you have a great army, and then look at what happened to Russia 3 years ago, right? Yeah. They were spending a lot of money. They thought they have the second biggest arsenal in the world. And then for the past 3 years, they've been fighting the 40th army in the world to a standstill, right? Which doesn't bode well for what they thought versus what they got. I think the US and just a few more countries in the world actually knows where it stands in terms of capabilities because it constantly tests itself. Now, I'm not advocating here for testing your army by instigating a bunch of wars, but it certainly helps you have less doubt in your capabilities. I think Italy is supposed to have some doubt. It's a healthy thing.
Yeah, no, I think everyone's right. As a matter of fact, I think 71% is low. The other percentage that I thought was interesting, 69% of Americans think that it's the World War III is going to be started with Russia. But to your point, they're fighting babushkas and fucking stalemating. Are you ready for assuming that our allies don't leave us, are they ready for
Okay, so first of all, they're not fighting babushkas. They're fighting people who are fighting really hard against them and are protecting their own land, right? Which is helpful with motivation, right?
Yes.
But yes, they're fighting a very under-resourced army. Now, the caveat here with Russia specifically is they turned out to suck at conventional warfare, right? So what we learned about them now is basically if Russia and Poland fought a conventional war, Poland would just waltz to Moscow within a week. Right, we basically learned that, even though we didn't know that until 3 years ago. If they fought Turkey, then Turkey would just get to Moscow within a week. That's what it looks like right now. The problem with Russia is that the nuclear piece is completely independent of the conventional piece. Conventional warfare requires logistics, it requires upkeep, it requires good commanders who know what they're doing, right? Whereas nuclear warfare requires pressing a button, and then even if 80% of the stuff you wanted to launch didn't launch, you still created a lot of damage, right? And so that is the concern with Russia specifically, that it's really weak in this part, but it's still really scary in the piece we don't want to test.
This is what's so beautifully frustrating about life, is that our $820 billion defense budget is still scary when put up against the madman with a finger on a button. You know, like all this money can't stop the mayhem if he unlaunched, because I think Russia has something like 2,000 nukes. I mean, that money isn't going to do shit in the face of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically if somebody has to fight Russia at this point, it's like fighting this MMA fighter that can't wrestle, can't grapple, can't do anything, but they just swing as hard as they can, and sometimes they hit. Right. So you're just worried about that one H-bomb falling at you. And by the way, there was a fighter whose right hand was called H-bomb, Dan Henderson. Right. So exactly that analogy.
Well, good news when it comes to war. Last story of the day. I try to avoid Trump as much as we can on this show, but listen, sometimes you just can't. So Supreme Court clears way for Trump administration to enforce transgender military ban for now. The Supreme Court on Tuesday said it will allow the Trump administration to implement its policy barring transgender people from serving the military while legal proceedings move forward. Blah, 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 blah. Here's the thing. If we're going to war, I need as many men, women, and transgendered soldiers as want to sign up, because I'm not going. Luckily, I'm 44. But this whole thing, I don't know. We've gotten in trouble for discussing transgender anything on the show before. But this 20 years ago was gays in the military. That was a big thing. Can't let the gays in the military. Got to get the gays out of the military. And they would have said the same thing. So this is a quote. The measure said that the military's high standards for troop readiness, lethality, cohesion, honesty, humility, uniformity, and integrity are inconsistent with the medical, surgical, and mental health constraints of individuals with gender dysmorphia. Switch a few words around, and this would have been the exact argument for not allowing gays in the military. That doesn't seem to have affected our lethality or honesty or humility or blah, blah, blah. I really don't have a dog in this fight. I think it's probably stupid. I think there's much bigger issues to deal with right now. What's your take on this?
My take is a little bit more nuanced, that the military is not just one big thing. There's a lot of different jobs in the military. And sometimes a particular attribute is relevant to the job description, and sometimes it's not. Right. So just like if I own a Hooters franchise, then the size of the breasts is important, right? If I am just hiring a secretary, I'm not allowed to use that as a parameter, even though some bosses do, right? But that becomes irrelevant to the job at hand because she's supposed to work with other parts, not those, right? So I think in the military, if you're talking about Navy SEALs, maybe it does matter. Right? Maybe you want the team to actually be as cohesive as possible. You want them to be as uniform as possible. You want them to think together, have the same culture, and be very similar in many ways. But if you're hiring an analyst, what does their sexual orientation or even their desire to be of one gender or the other have to do with their ability to analyze stuff?
Yeah. Even
Probably
in the cohesion piece, I'm not sure. I haven't seen any studies to suggest that you throw a transgender person into a group of people and cohesion goes down either. So, I mean, I guess it makes sense on a very surface level that, traditionally men and female roles are well defined and blah, blah, blah. And this, you know what I mean? So there is also.
Well, I'll add two elements here. One is the cohesion piece, which I do think will be affected because elite units have a certain culture, right? So adding somebody who is obviously very similar from that culture might make things more difficult. It might just make sense to make an entire unit of people who have that in common, because there are quite a few studies that basically show if your task is well defined, you're better off having no diversity whatsoever and being as uniform as possible. If your task is undefined and you have to think outside the box and brainstorm, then diversity is good, right? So you want your analysts to be diverse. You probably want your Navy SEALs and DevGru to be uniform to some extent. But then the other element that you have to consider with transgenderism is most transgender individuals undergo medical treatments that affect their performance in some other elements negatively, right? Of course, we talk a lot about transgenders in sports and how males who transition to female have an advantage against natural females. Yes, but they also have a disadvantage against natural males because the hormonal treatment they're undergoing makes them less fit than a male who isn't undergoing that same treatment. So do you want your Navy SEALs to be taking estradiol or estrogens or anything like that? Probably not, right? At the same time, again, if it's an analyst job, if it's planning logistics, if it's making sure that the kit of the guy who is going to submission is in order, I don't understand why that parameter has to matter. So just trying to ban it on a military-wide basis seems completely political.
It does
would
seem
make
political.
much more sense to say, hey, this parameter should be considered on the merits for every particular job.
Yeah. And I almost hate talking about this because I think it's a pure red herring. And every time we do, the peasants are fighting amongst themselves while the oligarchs are fucking us. Because again, they say in this, they didn't really break this down. This is what pisses me off about fucking modern media. Dude, like dig into the numbers. They say that there's 1.2 million active duty members in the military right now. That's they say between 2016 and 2021, that's a 5-year span. There were 1,892 service members that got, some sort of medical help for being gender affirming, whatever. They were treated in some way for gender dysmorphia. That's
by the way, do you notice the percentages there? It is more than I would expect.
Yeah, but it's still 0.157%.
Yeah.
0.157%. That's infinitesimal.
I know. But it is surprising that in the military you have it potentially more than the general population. Might be the fact that the military tends to sponsor some of the treatments once people are there.
I have some numbers for you there too, because of the so this 1,892, $52 million was spent on medical care, and that sounds like a lot until you do the math. It's only $27,000 each, and that's a lot, but it's not
still it's substantial relative. I think that's more than what they got for housing during the same period, right?
Right, but it's also like half a heart attack on the open market. So
I know, but the point is, it seems also then unfair that the military is sponsoring this specifically because people who don't have this particular condition are not getting that same amount of money.
Yeah. It is weird, like just as quick aside, as an Army brat, the socialization of the military in terms of like, my father didn't pay for housing. We did 100% medical, 100% dental, 100% educate. Like the military is very socialist in its benefit.
Well, it kind of has to be because there is no capitalism, right? There is no profit motive.
That's true. You have to. It's got to be a little benefit in there.
Let me touch upon another angle here that I found interesting. If you look at the recruitment numbers for this year, right? For years we were hearing recruitment is down. None of the branches of the military are hitting their target, and therefore we can no longer just focus on the demographic that is traditionally being recruited to the military. We have to open it up to all these other demographics, right? And so now in this 1 year, when we're actually going into the opposite extreme and we're banning various demographics and we're basically saying this needs to be a force of traditional masculinity, blah, 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 going back to the 1950s, recruitment is up by a lot compared to last year.
Interesting.
And last year it was up compared to the year before. So it seems like at least there was some, let's say, undercurrent of people who would otherwise join the military, but actually thought the military is a little bit too woke and therefore they didn't join. And now that they're seeing signs that that is being reversed, whether it is done in a correct way or not, it is actually temporarily boosting recruitment, even though you decreased your target audience, essentially.
I think we've talked about this. There needs to be institutions where the warrior class feels like they should go and have a duty to fulfill. And the military is one of them. It's probably dumb to quote a fucking movie, but that whole Few Good Men, where Jack Nicholson's character says, you sleep under the blanket of freedom I provide, and then question the means by which I provide it. There is a little bit of a, this is the way the sausage gets made. You don't want to know, just sit down, shut up, and be protected. And I generally default to that in the military.
Yeah.
So
but you should also consider still, we have a say in who we recruit, and that affects also how the military tends to act, right? So I think traditionally, let's say before the 1990s, you basically had three primary groups or archetypes of people that joined the military. You had patriots, you had people who needed to get out of a bad financial circumstance, and this was their way to college or to a good life. Yeah. And then you had sadists, right? This was their license to hurt people and get away with it. Right. And then in the 1990s, it looks like most branches of the US military made a conscious decision to filter out sadists in the recruitment process. That's probably one of the reasons for a lot of the shortfalls in recruitment, too. I think that also might have had a certain effect on police forces from the 1990s until now, because these people had to go somewhere. Right. And they're no longer going overseas. But it seems like now we've kind of expanded it to completely non-traditional groups, right? Because we're probably not talking about somebody, those 1,829 people probably don't belong to either of those three groups, right? No. If anything, I suspect that at least some have joined because their medical treatments got socialized, essentially, when they joined, right? Might have been other reasons, might have been just proving that they can do it, right? Showing the world that it's possible for somebody from that group to do it. Could be people transitioned while there, right? You see it in prisons today. It becomes popular for somebody to transition to female just to be in a female prison, which is
especially in California. You know what's weird? It never goes the other way. It never goes that a woman becomes a man and wants to go to a man prison. That's strange, isn't it?
Right.
Well,
I think if you're born a man and you just got a life sentence, guess who you prefer to be surrounded by?
I'm going to have to think about that one. You know what's going to be interesting? I hope someone does a study someday. What if we lose World War III and it was because of this 1,892 soldiers who were like, oh, fuck, shit. I knew it was a problem. I think we'll be all right, though. I just got to tell you, I feel pretty good about that.
I don't know if we'll be around to analyze that. So
no, that's too bad. Oh, because of the nuclear winter. All right.
Exactly. Just in case I'm wrong, which never happens. But let's say it did. I won't be able to analyze whose fault was it that we didn't press the right button.
Yeah, man, I am not going to make, I hope if it's nuclear winter, I need to be wiped out. I don't want to be one of the survivors. I don't want to, I'm very comfortable where I am. I need the internet. I need grocery stores. I don't want to be fighting other humans for a jar of, ravioli someday.
You don't think you can get away with just your quick wit?
Oh yeah, good point. No, I do. I do want to live now.
Like you don't have to fight other humans. You can bullshit them. I think
that can be fucking charming. That's all I got.
Gift of the gab, right?
All I need is hairspray and charm, and I'll get right through.
And the hairspray seems to be optional, no? Or does your wit go away when that thing just deflates?
I'm like Adonis. All my power comes from my hair. So if I don't, it's going to be a problem. You know what?
Samson. Jewish analogies, brother.
Oh, God damn it. I got all my mythology wrong. Son of a bitch. I'm going to get with this. We're getting on Jewish live television. I just need to tighten up the ship a little bit. I was supposed to pull this up when I mentioned Trump, but I forgot. The Men's Fitness magazine cover. It was very.
By the way, did you notice he lost a lot of weight?
I can't tell. Sometimes he looks all right. When he's in a suit, he looks very dumpy. I can't.
No, even look at his face now. Yeah. He lost a ridiculous amount of weight. He's probably on Ozempic, is my guess.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But probably from September, October is his heaviest.
He's thinning out.
Until now, he's thinning out by a lot. Like to the point where I'm kind of worried, as you said. But I guess he had a lot to lose to begin with, so it's probably a good thing.
Yeah. And Ozempic is crazy because it's so expensive. I just out of curiosity, I looked. It's like $600 a month. If they bring that down, we're gonna wipe out obesity. Now, again, we don't know the side effects. I think my doctor told me he suspects stomach cancer or something, but we don't know. We're gonna find out.
No, at least for now, it looks like there are negative side effects, but there are also so many positive side effects that are not a part of the described mechanism that the drug uses, right? That it's probably good to put as many people on it as possible. Now, I still think that it would have been nicer if we could just get people to walk more and eat less.
That's never going to happen.
But if that's not it, well, again, I think it is possible given that it works in other countries, right? So the way your environment is built determines how much you walk. And honestly, when I go to Europe, I walk way more than I do here, right?
Oh, 100%.
Even though I'm the same person, right? And I think that what the food around you looks like determines a lot of how much you eat, right? Yeah. If your only options for snacking are options that don't satiate you at all, it's probably going to result in eating 3,500 calories per day, which is the average in America.
That's wild. That is fucking crazy. Now that I'm on your diet, I'm doing keto. Man, not a lot of calories in
I mean,
keto-based.
you could just drown everything in lard, right? But yeah, 3,500 calories
That's a lot.
is a lot of food, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're getting it from Cheetos and Doritos and stuff like that, and then
And it's like half a bag.
you eat all of that and you're hungry.
You go to Five Guys. I hate that they put the calories up there because the calories in a normal Five Guys burger are out fucking rageous. Then the French fry, that's 3,500 calories right there.
Have you been to a Cheesecake Factory recently?
Oh, you fucking vey. It's insane, isn't
There is nothing in the regular menu that's less than 1,200 calories. Nothing.
This is why I think, okay, replace fluoride in the water with Ozempic in the water. Just I'll be thin. Wouldn't that be nice? A better way to live.
Yeah, and then if you don't like crime, replace it all with lithium in the water. If you're thinking that overpopulation is a problem, then cadmium in the water works just fine. Okay, kidney problems 15, 20 years from now, but infertility in 5. So, you'll get there quickly.
Oh, you're solving a lot of problems now. See what happens when you get a Jew and a Gentile talking about subjects in a box.
Yeah, they get to cadmium in the water in an hour.
As usual. All right. Hey, listen, I think the show has legs, so I think we should do it again next week and every week until we're famous. Are you in?
Sure.
All right, stick around in the green room. We have to decompress. But listen, I'll be back tomorrow, America. Tomorrow I have a reverend on the show. And then Friday I have a guy who wrote a book on porn addiction. So it should be fun. I'll see you then.
You should have them on at the same time. It will be more fun.
You think so?
Yeah.
Maybe I will. Good night.